The gunshot echoed across the valley, sending a flock of startled birds into the fading Montana sky as Daisy Vance reloaded her father's Winchester with trembling hands. Blood trickled down her temple where the flying glass had cut her when the first bullets shattered her windows, but she dared not wipe it away. Not now, not when she needed both hands steady on her rifle. "You're making a mistake, Daisy." Harlan Murray's voice carried from behind the cover of his men's horses. "Nobody turns down the Murray brothers and keeps their land, Montana Territory, 1876. A year since her father's passing had left her alone with a struggling cattle ranch, unpaid debts, and neighbors who saw a woman alone as easy prey. Daisy's hands steadied as she squeezed off another round, splintering the wood beside Murray's head. "I believe I just did," she shouted back, ducking as return fire spiderwebbed what remained of her front window. 26 years old and already tired beyond her years, Daisy had learned that the West gave nothing freely, especially to a woman who refused to bend. The Murrays had been after her land for months, first with lowball offers, then with threats, and now with bullets. Her father's once prosperous ranch had fallen on hard times after drought claimed half their cattle last season. But the springs on her northern pasture remained, and water in Montana was more valuable than gold. Crouching low, Daisy counted her remaining bullets. 6, not enough to hold off 5 men much longer. No neighbors would come. The nearest ranch was 10 miles away, and they'd made it clear they wouldn't get involved in Vance business. The ranch hands had all left after her father died and the money ran short. "We're burning you out, Vance." Another bullet struck the doorframe. Last chance to walk away alive. Daisy's throat tightened. She'd fought so hard, fought the bank, fought the drought, fought her own exhaustion working dawn to dusk. And now, after everything, she would lose it all to men who thought they could take whatever they wanted. A sudden commotion erupted outside, horses whinnying, men shouting in confusion. Then a voice she didn't recognize cut through the chaos. "I reckon 5 against 1 ain't exactly sporting, gentlemen." The newcomer's voice was calm, almost conversational, but something in it made the shooting stop. Daisy risked a glance through the shattered window. A tall figure sat astride a coal-black stallion at the edge of her yard. The setting sun silhouetted him, casting his face in shadow, but she could make out the distinct shape of a Stetson and the glint of a badge on his chest. "This ain't your business, stranger," Harlan Murray called out. "Marshal Thomas Blackwell," the man replied, and now Daisy could see him clearly as he rode forward, broad-shouldered, trail-worn, with a face weathered by sun and wind. "And seems to me you boys are trespassing on private property. We got business with the Vance woman, business that requires shooting up her home." The marshal's hand rested casually on his holster. "I'm afraid I'll need to see some paperwork on that kind of business." Murray spat on the ground. "We don't need no paperwork. This land'll be ours soon enough when the bank forecloses. Then I suggest you wait for that day." The marshal's voice hardened. "Until then, you're committing assault and destruction of property. Now you boys can ride away, or we can continue this conversation in Helena's jail." For a tense moment, Daisy thought the Murrays might shoot. 5 against 2 weren't odds she liked, even with a marshal on her side. But something in Blackwell's steady gaze must have convinced them this wasn't their day. With muttered curses, they mounted up. "This ain't over, Vance." Harlan called as they rode off. Only when the dust from their horses had settled did Daisy lower her rifle. She stepped onto her porch, keeping the weapon ready. "Appreciate the help, Marshal, but they'll be back." Thomas Blackwell dismounted, his movements fluid despite his trail-weary appearance. Up close, she could see his eyes were a startling blue against his sun-darkened skin. A small scar ran along his jawline and his dark hair curled beneath his hat. "Miss Vance, I presume?" He tipped his hat. "Seems you've made some powerful enemies. Didn't make them." "Inherited them along with everything else." She gestured to her bullet-riddled home. "What brings a marshal out to these parts? We don't see much law around here. Tracking a gang that robbed the Helena Bank last week, trail led me this way." He studied the damage to her home with a frown. "How long have the Murrays been causing trouble?" "Started after my father died last spring." Daisy suddenly felt the weight of exhaustion. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her lightheaded. "They want my water rights." Thomas noticed her wavering and stepped forward. "You're bleeding, madam." Daisy touched her temple, surprised at how much blood had dried there. "It's nothing, just a scratch, still needs tending." His gaze swept over her property, the weathered barn, the small herd of cattle visible in the distance, the fences in need of repair. "You running this place alone?" "Don't have much choice." Daisy straightened her shoulders, refusing to appear weak. "My father's hands left when I couldn't pay them. Been managing." "Managing to get yourself killed," he muttered, then seemed to catch himself. "Pardon my frankness, Miss Vance." Daisy almost smiled. "Daisy. And frankness is about the only thing I can afford these days, Marshal. Thomas, or Tucker, as most folks call me." He glanced toward the setting sun. "Those men will keep their distance tonight, but I don't trust Murray to stay away for long. Mind if I make camp here?" "I can help patch up those windows before nightfall." Daisy hesitated. She'd learned the hard way that accepting help often came with expectations she wasn't willing to meet. But her practical side knew she couldn't board up the windows alone before dark, and a night with open windows meant coyotes, or worse, could wander in. "There's a spare room in the back," she finally said. "Least I can offer for your help." As Thomas led his horse toward the barn, Daisy watched him go. She'd been fighting alone for so long that the sudden appearance of help felt almost unnatural. The marshal might have scared off the Murrays for now, but her problems ran deeper than broken windows and bullying neighbors. The bank note was coming due in 3 weeks, and unless a miracle happened, she'd lose everything her father had built. No marshal, no matter how timely his arrival, could fix that. Still, as she watched Thomas return with his saddlebags and tools, Daisy felt something she hadn't experienced in months, a small, fragile spark of hope. The night fell cold and clear as Thomas helped Daisy nail boards across the shattered windows. He worked methodically, his movements precise and efficient. Occasionally their hands would brush as she held a board steady, and Daisy found herself acutely aware of his presence in a way that surprised her. "Your father was Joseph Vance?" Thomas asked as they finished the last window. "You knew him?" Daisy handed him another nail. "Of him. Reputation as a fair man, good cattleman." Thomas drove the nail home with a single strike. "Had some dealings with him when I was riding for the Diamond K outfit years back before I pinned on this badge. So you weren't always a lawman?" "No, madam. Drove cattle up from Texas, tried my hand at mining, scouted for the army." He set down his hammer. "Picked up a badge 5 years ago in Wyoming, found I had a knack for it." Daisy studied him in the lantern light. There was something in his manner that spoke of a man who had seen much of the world but remained unburdened by it. "What brought you to Montana?" "The job. Followed it where it led." He didn't elaborate, and something in his expression suggested there were stories he wasn't sharing. Inside, Daisy lit the stove and put on a pot of coffee. The house was modest but well-built, a testament to her father's craftsmanship. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a small sitting area with bookshelves her mother had insisted on bringing from Philadelphia when they'd moved west 15 years ago. "Not much for dinner, I'm afraid," she apologized, setting out some cornbread and beans. "Wasn't expecting company. Better than trail rations." Thomas removed his hat and gun belt, hanging them by the door with practiced ease. Been living on jerky and hardtack for days. As they ate, Daisy found herself telling him about the ranch, how the drought had decimated their herd, how her father's heart had given out just when they needed him most, how the bank in Helena had been pressuring her to sell. "Murray's brother is married to the banker's sister," she explained. "They've been working together to force me out. With the water rights on my property, they could control half the grazing land in this valley." Thomas listened without interruption, his blue eyes thoughtful. "How much do you owe the bank?" $2,000. The sum felt enormous when spoken aloud. "Payments due in 3 weeks. I've got maybe 200 saved. And your cattle, 30 head left. Not enough to cover the debt, even if I could get them to market in time." Daisy stared into her coffee cup. "I've tried everything took in mending from town, sold my mother's silver, even wrote to my cousin in Boston for a loan. Nothing's come through." What about selling part of the land? Keep the house and enough for a small operation. Murray won't buy part, he wants it all or nothing. Daisy's jaw tightened. And I promised my father I'd keep this place together. It's all I have left of him. Thomas nodded, understanding in his eyes. Promises to the dead can be the heaviest kind to carry. There was something in his voice, a personal knowledge of such burdens that made Daisy wonder what promises he himself carried. But before she could ask, he spoke again. I still need to track down that bank robbery gang. They stole $20,000 and last reports put them somewhere in these mountains. He studied her across the table. But I reckon I could spare a few days here first, help get your place more defensible at least. You don't have to do that, Daisy said quickly, though relief flooded through her at the offer. Consider it maintaining the peace. Murray and his boys are likely to try again, and I'd rather not have a murder to investigate on top of everything else. Daisy almost smiled at his practical framing of the offer. I can pay you something for your work, not much, but no need, he interrupted. Just decent meals and coffee that doesn't taste like saddle leather. After supper, Thomas insisted on taking first watch despite having ridden hard all day. Daisy protested but eventually relented when he pointed out that she looked ready to collapse where she stood. I'll wake you at midnight, he promised. Get some rest, Miss Vance. Tomorrow we'll be here soon enough. In her small bedroom, Daisy removed her boots and lay down fully clothed, her father's revolver close at hand. She hadn't slept properly in months, always listening for trouble, always worried about what the next day would bring. But knowing someone else was watching over things, even for a few hours, loosened the knot of tension she carried between her shoulders. She listened to Thomas's steady footsteps as he patrolled her porch and found herself wondering about the man who had appeared so unexpectedly in her life. He wasn't like the other lawmen she'd encountered, men who wore their badges like licenses to bully. There was something solid about Thomas Blackwell, something trustworthy in the way he looked at a person directly, as if measuring their worth beyond their circumstances. It was dangerous thinking. He would be gone in a few days, back to his pursuit of outlaws, and she would be alone again with her problems. Best not to depend on temporary help, no matter how welcome it might be. Still, as sleep finally claimed her, Daisy couldn't help but feel that something had shifted with the Marshal's arrival, as if the endless struggle of the past year had paused, if only briefly, to allow her a moment to catch her breath. Outside, Thomas Blackwell watched the moonlit landscape, his rifle across his knees. His thoughts were on the woman sleeping inside a woman fighting battles that would have broken many men he knew. The courage she displayed stirred something in him, something he'd thought long buried beneath years of tracking outlaws and sleeping under stars. He'd meant what he'd said about helping her, but he hadn't told her everything. The gang he was tracking had been seen meeting with Harlan Murray just days before. Whatever was happening at the Vance ranch was likely connected to the robbery in ways Daisy didn't yet understand. And Thomas intended to find out exactly what those connections were before the 3-week deadline that threatened to take everything from her. Dawn broke with a clarity that only mountain country can deliver, painting the eastern sky in hues of amber and rose. Daisy woke with a start, realizing she had slept through the night. Thomas had never woken her for her watch. She found him in the kitchen, coffee already brewing on the stove. He'd shaved and looked more rested than he had any right to after a night spent awake. You were supposed to wake me, she accused, pouring herself a cup of the strong brew. You needed the sleep more than I needed the rest, he nodded toward the window. Besides, had some thinking to do. Daisy followed his gaze outside. In the early light, she could see fresh hoofprints in the dirt near her corral tracks that hadn't been there the night before. Someone came close in the night, Thomas explained. Watched the place for about an hour, then rode off, didn't approach the house. A chill ran through Daisy despite the coffee's warmth. Murray's men, hard to say, could be them, could be my bank robbers. He studied her face. Either way, we've got work to do. Your fences won't keep out determined men, and those boarded windows won't stop bullets. After a breakfast of biscuits and bacon, they began reinforcing the house. Thomas showed Daisy how to create defensive positions, moving furniture to create barriers, establishing clear fields of fire from different windows, planning escape routes if the house became indefensible. "My father always said this place was built sturdy enough to withstand anything," Daisy remarked as they stacked heavy books behind a windowsill to create additional protection. "Your father built it well," Thomas agreed, testing the thickness of a wall. "But he probably wasn't thinking about gunfights when he raised these beams." By midday, they turned their attention to the outbuildings. The barn needed repairs to several boards that had rotted through, and the chicken coop had a hole where a fox had tried to gain entry. Thomas worked steadily, his movements economical and practiced. Daisy matched his pace, determined not to appear weak. As they repaired the corral fence together, the sun high overhead, Thomas paused. "When was the last time you rode into town?" Daisy wiped sweat from her brow. "Been nearly 3 weeks. Takes a full day there and back, and I can't leave the cattle unattended that long. We should go tomorrow. I need to send a telegram to the marshal's office in Helena, let them know my whereabouts, and you need supplies." "I can't afford, consider it part of my investigation," he interrupted. "I'll need to ask around about the bank robbers anyway, and we can see if there's any news about your loan situation." Daisy hesitated. The thought of leaving her ranch vulnerable didn't sit well, but she knew he was right about needing supplies. And perhaps in town she could find someone willing to buy some of her furniture or her mother's remaining jewelry. "All right," she finally agreed. "We'll leave at first light." As afternoon faded into evening, Thomas helped Daisy move her remaining cattle to the pasture nearest the house. They worked well together, with Thomas taking direction from her without question, acknowledging her expertise with the herd. He rode like a man born to the saddle, and his way with the animals spoke of years working cattle. "You're good with them," Daisy observed as they guided the last steer into the enclosed pasture. "Spent enough years pushing longhorns up from Texas to know my way around ornery beef." He swung down from his borrowed horse one of Daisy's 2 remaining mounts. "These are fine animals, good bloodlines. My father crossed Herefords with our original stock, said they weathered Montana winters better." Pride crept into her voice. "These 30 are all that's left, but they're the best of the herd." Thomas ran a practiced eye over the cattle. "With the right bull and a couple of good seasons, you could rebuild from these. If I still have the land to graze them on," Daisy reminded him. Back at the house, they shared another simple meal. The day's physical work had awakened Daisy's appetite, and she found herself eating with more enthusiasm than she had in months. Thomas seemed pleased to see it, passing her the last of the biscuits without comment. As darkness fell, they sat on the porch with their coffee, watching the stars emerge one by one. The night was peaceful, with only the soft lowing of cattle and the distant cry of a coyote breaking the silence. "How'd you end up alone out here?" Thomas asked after a long, comfortable silence. "No husband, family," Daisy considered deflecting the question but found herself answering honestly. "Was engaged once to the son of a rancher near Helena, Richard Colton." The name still brought a twinge of something not heartbreak exactly, but disappointment. "When my father fell ill and the ranch started struggling, Richard decided his future looked brighter elsewhere, left for California 2 years ago. His loss," Thomas said simply, "turned out to be a blessing, really. He wasn't cut out for ranch life, too soft, too concerned with appearances." Daisy sipped her coffee. "My mother died when I was 16, no siblings. My father's sister lives in Denver, but we haven't been close since he married my mother. She didn't approve of him marrying beneath his station. And you stayed because this is home." "Because this is all I know," Daisy corrected. "And because my father poured his life into this land. Seems wrong to give up on it without a fight." Thomas nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Nothing wrong with fighting for what matters." "What about you?" Daisy asked. "You mentioned Wyoming." "Family there," a shadow crossed his face. "Had a wife once, Sarah. Fever took her and our son 5 years back." He said it matter-of-factly, but Daisy saw the pain beneath the simple words. "After that, staying in one place didn't make much sense. The badge gives me purpose, keeps me moving." "I'm sorry," Daisy said softly. Thomas acknowledged her sympathy with a slight nod. Life continues. We endure. His words echoed her own philosophy so precisely that Daisy felt a sudden connection to this quiet man, a recognition of shared experience despite their different paths. They had both lost, both endured, both found ways to continue when stopping would have been easier. The moment stretched between them, comfortable yet charged with something unnamed. Then Thomas cleared his throat and stood. We should get some rest if we're riding to town tomorrow. He gathered their empty cups. I'll take first watch tonight and I promise to wake you this time. See that you do, Daisy replied, trying to lighten the mood. A promise is a promise, Marshal. His smile in response was brief but genuine, transforming his serious face for a moment. Yes, madam. That it is. Later, as Daisy lay in bed waiting for sleep, she found herself thinking about Thomas Blackwell not as the timely rescuer who had driven off the Murrays, but as the man whose quiet strength and integrity had begun to earn her trust. It was a dangerous path for her thoughts to travel, she knew. He would leave soon enough, returning to his life of pursuit and justice, while she remained tethered to her struggling ranch. But for tonight, knowing he was there, keeping watch, allowed her to close her eyes and surrender to sleep without the fear that had been her constant companion for too long. The ride to Timber Creek took most of the morning, with Thomas and Daisy traveling side by side along the rutted wagon road. The small town served as the trading center for the surrounding ranches and farms, though it was a far cry from the bustling communities further east. A single dusty street lined with false-fronted buildings, Timber Creek boasted a general store, a saloon, a small hotel, a livery stable, and a combination post office and telegraph office. Not much has changed, Thomas remarked as they rode in. Several people on the boardwalk stopped to stare at them, or more specifically, at Daisy riding alongside a man wearing a marshal's badge. Timber Creek isn't big on change, Daisy replied, though they built that new church last year. She nodded toward a white clapboard building at the edge of town. They tied their horses at the hitching rail in front of the general store. Before dismounting, Thomas scanned the street with the practiced eye of a lawman. Murray's horse isn't here, but that's his brother's bay at the saloon. Daisy followed his gaze. Frank Murray, he's the brains between the brothers, though that's not saying much. Let me do the talking if we run into him, Thomas advised, helping Daisy down from her horse. The brief touch of his hands at her waist sent an unexpected warmth through her. Inside the general store, Walter Jenkins looked up from his ledger with surprise. Miss Vance, wasn't expecting to see you before the month's end. Hello, Walter. Daisy nodded politely. Though the storekeeper had always been fair in his dealings, he was also Timber Creek's most notorious gossip. Need a few supplies? Walter's eyes fixed on Thomas, curiosity evident. Marshal, don't believe we've met. Marshal Thomas Blackwell. Thomas shook the man's hand, just passing through, tracking some fugitives. Those bank robbers from Helena, Walter's eyes widened. Heard about that business. $20,000 taken, 2 guards shot. That's the bunch. Seen any strangers in town recently? While Thomas questioned the storekeeper, Daisy gathered the supplies they needed: flour, coffee, ammunition, lamp oil, and a few other necessities. She tallied the costs in her head, wincing at the total. Even with her careful selections, it would take a significant portion of her meager savings. As she approached the counter with her goods, the store's door opened and Frank Murray entered. He stopped short at the sight of Daisy, his surprise quickly giving way to a cold smile. Well now, if it isn't Miss Vance. His gaze shifted to Thomas, noting the badge. Making new friends in high places, I see, Mr. Murray. Thomas's voice was neutral but carried authority. I understand you and your brother have been causing trouble for Miss Vance. Frank raised his eyebrows in feigned innocence. Just a neighborly disagreement over land boundaries, nothing that concerns the law. Shooting up someone's home goes well beyond a neighborly disagreement. Walter Jenkins leaned forward over the counter, clearly not wanting to miss a word of this exchange. Frank's smile tightened. Don't know what tales she's been spinning, Marshal, but my brother and I are law-abiding businessmen. If Miss Vance has complaints, she should take them to the proper authorities. I am the proper authority, Thomas replied evenly, "and I was there yesterday when your brother and his men opened fire on Miss Vance's home." A tense silence filled the store. Frank's hand drifted toward his belt, though he wore no gun that Daisy could see. "Careful, Mr. Murray," Thomas warned softly. "Very careful." After a moment, Frank forced a laugh. "Seems we've got ourselves a misunderstanding, Marshal. I'll have a word with my brother about respecting a lady's property." He tipped his hat mockingly toward Daisy. "Enjoy your time in town, Miss Vance. Won't be many more visits before that ranch of yours changes hands." After he left, Walter Jenkins let out a low whistle. "Those Murrays have been strutting around like they already own half the county lately. Been in here buying supplies for a big cattle operation more than their current spread would need." "Is that so?" Thomas exchanged a glance with Daisy. "When did they start making these purchases?" "About 2 weeks back, right after Harlan returned from a trip to Helena." Walter began tallying Daisy's purchases. "That'll be $12.40, Miss Vance." Daisy reached for her small coin purse, but Thomas placed a hand on her arm. "Add it to my account, Mr. Jenkins." "You don't have an account, Marshal. Then start one." Thomas's tone left no room for argument. Before Daisy could protest, he added, "Consider it payment for room and board while I conduct my investigation." Once outside with their supplies, Daisy confronted him. "I don't need charity, Marshal." "It's not charity, it's practical." He secured the packages to their horses. "You need your funds for that bank note." Daisy wanted to argue further but knew he was right. Every dollar she saved brought her incrementally closer to keeping her land, though the gap still seemed impossibly wide. Their next stop was the telegraph office, where Thomas sent a message to his superior in Helena, updating him on his search for the bank robbers and requesting information about the Murrays' recent activities in the capital. "How long before you get a reply?" Daisy asked as they left the office. "Day or two if we're lucky." Thomas guided her toward the small hotel. "Let's get something to eat before we head back." The hotel's dining room was nearly empty, with only the midday stage passengers occupying a table in the corner. As Thomas and Daisy settled at a table, the hotel owner, Martha Simmons, approached with a warm smile for Daisy that cooled considerably when she looked at Thomas. "Daisy Vance, haven't seen you in an age." Martha's gaze lingered on Thomas's badge. "Another lawman passing through, I see." "This is Marshal Blackwell," Daisy introduced. "He's helping with some trouble at the ranch." "Those Murray boys again," Martha shook her head. "Never did trust them, even when their daddy was alive." She handed them each a menu. "Special today is beef stew with dumplings." As Martha moved away, Daisy explained in a low voice, her husband was a deputy sheriff. Killed 3 years ago trying to stop a stagecoach robbery. She's not overly fond of lawmen, now says they're all the same, riding in with big promises and riding out when things get difficult. "Can't blame her for that view," Thomas replied. "Seen enough badges who fit that description." They ordered the stew, which proved to be hearty and well-seasoned. As they ate, Daisy noticed several townspeople glancing their way, curiosity evident in their expressions. A woman dining with a man who wasn't her husband or relative would normally cause gossip in a small town like Timber Creek, but the presence of Thomas's badge seemed to temper the worst of it. "Everyone's watching us," Daisy murmured, uncomfortable under the scrutiny. "Let them watch." Thomas seemed unbothered. "Might keep the Murrays on their best behavior if the town knows you've got the law on your side." "Temporarily," Daisy reminded him. "Once you leave, I'll be alone again." Something flickered in Thomas's eyes, a brief uncertainty that surprised her. "One problem at a time, Miss Vance." After their meal, they visited the bank, a small brick building at the end of the main street. The banker, Edwin Phillips, was a thin, nervous man who grew visibly agitated when Daisy inquired about extending her loan. "I'm afraid that's impossible, Miss Vance," he said, adjusting his spectacles. The terms were quite clear. Payment in full by the 15th or foreclosure proceedings will begin. "Surely there's some flexibility," Thomas suggested. "Miss Vance has never missed a payment before her father's passing." Phillips glanced at Thomas's badge with thinly veiled annoyance. "Banking regulations don't allow for sentimentality, Marshal. The loan is already in arrears." And I suppose the Murray brothers would be ready to purchase the property immediately after foreclosure. Thomas's question was casual, but his eyes were sharp, the banker's face flushed. I don't see how that's relevant to this discussion. Just curious about the coincidence. The Murrays seem very confident about acquiring land they don't yet own. If you're implying impropriety, Marshal, I suggest you produce evidence or keep such thoughts to yourself. Philip straightened the papers on his desk. Now, if there's nothing else, I have appointments waiting. Outside the bank, Daisy sighed heavily. That went exactly as I expected. Phillips is hiding something, Thomas said as they walked back to their horses. The way he reacted when I mentioned the Murrays, there's more there than a simple business relationship. His sister is married to Frank Murray, Daisy reminded him. But that doesn't explain why the bank won't work with me. My land is worth more than the loan amount, even in this market. Unless someone's offering significantly more. Thomas helped Daisy mount her horse. The Murrays have been spending money like water lately, according to Jenkins. Money they didn't have a month ago. You think they're connected to your bank robbers? $20,000 would buy a lot of land and influence. Thomas swung into his saddle. Let's head back. I want to check those tracks I found last night before dark. The ride home was quieter, both of them lost in thought about the connections between the Murrays, the bank, and possibly the robbery in Helena. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent as they approached the Vance ranch, casting long shadows across the valley. They were still a mile from the house when Thomas suddenly reined in his horse, his posture alert. Smoke. Daisy followed his gaze and felt her heart lurch. A thin column of dark smoke rose from the direction of her ranch. "Dear God," she whispered, then kicked her horse into a gallop. Thomas kept pace beside her, his expression grim. As they crested the final rise, Daisy's fears were confirmed. Flames engulfed her barn, the fire already spreading to the nearby corral. In the yard, 3 mounted men were visible, watching the blaze with obvious satisfaction. "Murray," Daisy hissed, reaching for her rifle. Thomas caught her arm. "Wait, they're armed and ready. We need to approach carefully." "That's my home, and rushing in will only get you killed." His blue eyes held hers. "Trust me, Daisy." The use of her first name, spoken with such urgency, gave her pause. She nodded reluctantly, and Thomas outlined his plan. They separated, with Daisy circling around to approach from the east, while Thomas took the more direct route toward the house. The strategy would divide the Murrays' attention and give them a better chance of retaking the property without bloodshed. Daisy moved her horse through the trees that bordered her eastern pasture, keeping low in the saddle. The smoke provided some cover, though its acrid scent burned her throat and made her eyes water. Through the haze, she could see Harlan Murray and 2 of his men near her house, rifles ready. From the opposite direction, Thomas appeared, riding straight toward the men with the confidence of someone who held all the cards. His badge glinted in the afternoon light. "That's far enough, Marshal," Harlan called out, raising his rifle. "This ain't your fight." "Burning down someone's property makes it my fight, Murray." Thomas's voice carried clearly across the yard. "You boys are piling up charges faster than I can write them down. No witnesses, no charges." One of Harlan's men raised his rifle, aiming at Thomas. Everything happened at once. Daisy broke from her cover, firing a warning shot that sent Harlan's men scrambling. Thomas dove from his horse as gunfire erupted, rolling behind the water trough. Daisy dismounted and ran crouched toward her house, using the smoke for cover. A bullet splintered the wood near her head as she reached the porch. She returned fire, forcing one of Murray's men to retreat toward the burning barn. From his position, Thomas picked off another, the man's scream indicating a hit to the shoulder rather than a fatal wound. Harlan Murray. Thomas's voice boomed across the yard. "You're surrounded and outgunned. Throw down your weapons." A wild laugh answered him. "You think I don't know it's just you and the Vance woman? We've been watching this place for days." More gunfire erupted, pinning Daisy behind a porch column. She could see Thomas returning fire methodically, conserving his ammunition. One of Murray's men broke cover, running for the horses. Thomas's shot caught him in the leg, sending him sprawling. The standoff continued for what felt like hours, but was likely only minutes. Smoke from the barn now engulfed much of the yard, making visibility poor. Daisy could hear the panicked lowing of her cattle, frightened by the fire and gunshots. Suddenly, hoofbeats thundered from the direction of the main road. Through the smoke, Daisy glimpsed several riders approaching fast. "Marshal, we got your telegram," a voice called out. "U.S. Marshal's Service." The reinforcements Thomas had somehow summoned tipped the balance immediately. Surrounded and outgunned, Harlan Murray and his remaining man surrendered, throwing down their weapons and raising their hands. As the marshals took the Murrays into custody, Daisy turned her attention to the fire. The barn was lost, but with Thomas organizing a bucket brigade from the well to the corral, they managed to save the fence and prevent the fire from spreading to the house. By nightfall, the immediate danger had passed. The barn was a smoldering ruin, but the house stood intact. The marshals had taken the Murrays away, promising that charges of arson, attempted murder, and assault would keep them occupied for years to come. Exhausted and soot-covered, Daisy sat on her porch steps, watching as Thomas thanked the last of the marshals who had responded to his call. "How did you know?" she asked when he joined her. "How did you know they would attack today?" "I didn't know for certain," Thomas admitted, sitting beside her. "But when we saw Frank Murray in town, I suspected they might try something while they thought we were away. I sent a second telegram from Timber Creek, asked for marshals to be dispatched immediately. You saved my home." Daisy's voice caught on the words. The emotions of the day, fear, anger, relief, threatened to overwhelm her carefully maintained composure. "We saved it together," Thomas corrected gently. "You fought back when most would have given up long ago." In the silver moonlight now breaking through the dissipating smoke, Daisy could see the genuine respect in his eyes. She had grown so accustomed to fighting her battles alone, to being dismissed because she was a woman trying to run a ranch in a man's world, that his acknowledgement of her strength struck a chord deep within her. "The barn can be rebuilt," she said, trying to focus on practical matters rather than the warmth spreading through her at his nearness. "But I still don't have enough to pay the bank note. Without that, saving the buildings won't matter." "About that." Thomas reached inside his coat and withdrew a folded paper. "While you were speaking with Martha at the hotel, I received a reply to my first telegram. The Helena bank manager confirmed my suspicions about the Murrays." Daisy took the paper, reading it in the dim light from the house windows. "The money from the robbery, $20,000, most of it recovered from a hidden compartment in Harlan Murray's saddle." Thomas's voice held grim satisfaction. "They robbed the bank, then planned to use the money to buy your land once the bank foreclosed. With Philip's help, they would have made it all look legitimate. And Philip's, under arrest for conspiracy, seems he was promising the Murrays your water rights long before your loan came due." Daisy let out a long breath, the implications sinking in. "So the foreclosure was never going to happen legally." Thomas took back the telegram. "The regional bank manager will be contacting you about restructuring your loan. With the Murrays and Phillips facing prison, you'll have time to rebuild." Relief washed over Daisy in a wave so powerful she had to steady herself against the porch rail. After months of fighting alone, of watching her father's legacy slip through her fingers, the reprieve felt almost unreal. "Thank you," she whispered, the words wholly inadequate for what he had done. Thomas shook his head. "You would have uncovered it eventually. You're too stubborn to give up without a fight." There was admiration in his voice and something else, something warmer that made Daisy's heartbeat quicken. "What happens now?" she asked, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting, of the way the moonlight softened his weathered features. "Now," Thomas considered the question, "now you rebuild. Start with the barn, then work on increasing your herd. With good breeding stock and a couple of favorable seasons, this place could be profitable again." "And you?" Daisy couldn't quite meet his eyes. "Will you be moving on to your next assignment?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "I've been thinking about that," he finally said. "The Marshal Service has been after me to take a more permanent position, establish a proper office in one of the growing towns in the territory. Helena, maybe, or even here in Timber Creek." Daisy's heart jumped at his words. "You'd consider staying in Timber Creek?" I've been wandering a long time, Daisy. He turned to face her, his expression open in a way she hadn't seen before. Maybe it's time to put down some roots again. The implication in his words hung between them unspoken but clear. Daisy had learned caution the hard way, had built walls around her heart after Richard's abandonment. But there was something about Thomas Blackwell that made those walls seem less necessary, less protective and more isolating. Timber Creek could use a good lawman, she said carefully. And I could use. Thomas hesitated, then continued with quiet certainty, a reason to stay. Their eyes met, and Daisy felt the connection between them, a bridge built of shared struggles, mutual respect, and something newer and more fragile that might, given time, grow into something lasting. The spare room is yours for as long as you need it, she offered, her voice steadier than she felt, at least until you decide about that position. Thomas's smile was slow but reached his eyes, crinkling the corners in a way that transformed his serious face. I'd like that, Miss Vance. Daisy, she corrected. I think we're well past formalities, Marshal. Tucker, he returned, reaching out to gently brush a smudge of soot from her cheek. The brief touch sent warmth spreading through her. If I'm staying, you should call me Tucker. In that moment, with the stars emerging above them and the worst of their troubles behind them, Daisy allowed herself to hope not just for the survival of her ranch, but for something she had stopped believing was possible. A future that included more than just endurance, a future that might include joy. The following weeks brought changes to the Vance ranch that Daisy could scarcely have imagined. True to his word, the regional bank manager arrived from Helena to restructure her loan, extending the terms and reducing the interest rate in light of the criminal conspiracy uncovered between Phillips and the Murrays. With 5 years instead of 3 weeks to repay the debt, Daisy could breathe again. Thomas Tucker, as she now called him, had officially accepted the position of marshal for Timber Creek and the surrounding county. The town council, eager to have a permanent lawman after years of sporadic visits from circuit riders, had quickly approved funds for a small office and jail in town. But despite his new responsibilities, Tucker spent more time at the Vance ranch than in his official quarters behind the jail. Together, they had begun rebuilding the barn with help from neighboring ranchers who had kept their distance during Daisy's struggles, but now offered assistance with the Murrays out of the picture. The community that had once abandoned her seemed eager to make amends, especially with Tucker's steady presence reminding them of their obligations to a neighbor in need. On a clear autumn day, as they worked together setting roof beams on the new barn, Daisy found herself watching Tucker as he directed the raising of a particularly heavy timber. He had shed his coat in the afternoon warmth, and the play of muscles beneath his shirt spoke of the strength he normally kept in careful check. There was something profoundly right about seeing him there on her land, building something that would last. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, catching her gaze as the beam settled into place. Daisy smiled, handing him the canteen of water she'd brought from the house. "Just thinking about how different things look from a month ago." Tucker took a long drink, then wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Different in a good way, I hope. The best way." Daisy looked around at the half-completed barn, the cattle grazing peacefully in the distance, the house with its newly repaired windows gleaming in the sunlight. "I was so close to losing everything, now it feels like." "A new beginning," Tucker suggested when she trailed off. Yes, their eyes met, and Daisy felt that now familiar warmth spreading through her. Over the past weeks, they had fallen into a comfortable routine, sharing meals, working side by side during the day, talking on the porch in the evenings. Tucker still slept in the spare room, maintaining a respectful distance that both frustrated and reassured Daisy. He was giving her time, she knew, allowing her to set the pace of whatever was growing between them. "New beginnings take courage," Tucker said, setting down the canteen. "Taking a chance on something unknown. Are you calling me a coward, Marshal Blackwell?" Daisy's tone was light, but they both knew the conversation had shifted to terrain more personal than barn raising. "Never." His blue eyes held her steadily. "You're the bravest person I know, Daisy Vance. You fought for this land when most would have surrendered. You stood your ground against men with guns and bankers with paperwork. That's not the behavior of someone afraid to take chances." "That's different," Daisy argued softly. "Fighting for land, for property, there's nothing to lose but things that can be rebuilt." "And what are you afraid of losing now?" The direct question caught her off guard. Tucker had never pressed her about the careful distance she maintained between them, had never demanded more than she was ready to give. But now, standing in the shadow of the barn they were building together, he was asking her to examine her fears. "The last time I trusted someone with my heart, he left at the first sign of trouble," Daisy admitted. "When my father fell ill and the ranch started struggling, Richard couldn't leave fast enough, said he hadn't signed up for hardship." Tucker's expression darkened. "Some men aren't worth the ground they walk on." "It wasn't just that he left," Daisy continued, needing him to understand. "It was that I had been so blind. I had built a future in my mind, planned a life with someone who wasn't who I thought he was. I can't make that mistake again." "So you'd rather make no choice at all?" Tucker's voice was gentle, without judgment. "Keep your heart safe by never risking it." Put that way, her caution seemed less like wisdom and more like fear. Daisy looked away, her gaze falling on the distant mountains that had witnessed generations of struggle and triumph in this harsh, beautiful land. "I don't want to be alone anymore," she finally confessed, the words catching in her throat. "But I'm afraid of relying on someone who might not stay when things get difficult again, and things will get difficult, that's the nature of ranching." Tucker stepped closer, close enough that Daisy could feel the warmth radiating from him, smell the clean scent of sawdust and sunshine on his skin. "Daisy," he said her name like a promise, "I've seen you at your worst moments, outnumbered, outgunned, about to lose everything. And in those moments, all I wanted was to fight beside you, not run from the trouble." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she chose, and took her hand in his. His palm was rough with calluses, warm and solid around her fingers. "I can't promise there won't be hard times ahead," he continued. "But I can promise I won't leave you to face them alone, not unless you ask me to go." The sincerity in his voice, in his steady gaze, melted something inside Daisy that had been frozen since Richard's betrayal. Tucker Blackwell was not Richard Colton. He had proven that a dozen times over in the weeks she had known him. "I won't ask you to go," she whispered, her voice stronger than she expected. "Not today, not tomorrow." Tucker's smile transformed his face, erasing the lines of worry that had marked his features during their conversation. "That sounds like a good beginning." Before Daisy could respond, he leaned down and kissed her gently at first, as if still giving her the chance to step away, then with greater certainty as she responded. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer, and Daisy found herself meeting his embrace with equal fervor, her hands sliding up to his shoulders. The kiss deepened, and Daisy felt as though something long dormant within her had awakened a capacity for joy she had thought lost with her father's death and Richard's betrayal. Tucker kissed her like a man who had found something precious after a long search, with reverence and hunger in equal measure. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Tucker rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since the first night I spent on your porch, watching you defend your home with more courage than most men I've known." Daisy laughed softly, surprised by the lightness in her chest. "And here I thought you were just being a gentleman, keeping your distance." "I was trying to be." His smile turned rueful. "You deserve time to know your own mind, not some lovesick Marshal pressing his attentions when you were vulnerable." "Lovesick, Daisy raised an eyebrow, emboldened by his admission. "Is that what this is, Marshal Blackwell?" Tucker's expression sobered. "I thought I'd never feel this way again after Sarah died. Didn't want to, if I'm honest. Grief was easier than risking that kind of loss a second time." His hand came up to cup her cheek. "But then I met a stubborn rancher who wouldn't give up on her land, and I found myself not wanting to give up either." The raw honesty of his words touched Daisy deeply. They had both lost, both retreated into protective solitude, both found unexpected second chances in each other. "I think," she said slowly, "that we've both been alone long enough." Their second kiss was a confirmation, a promise exchanged without words. Around them, the sounds of the ranch continued, birds calling, cattle lowing in the distance, the creaking of the new barn timbers settling into place. Life going on, as it always had, but now with new possibilities stretching before them. When the kiss ended, Tucker smiled down at her with an expression that made Daisy's heart skip. "We should probably get back to work before the neighbors start talking even more than they already are." Daisy glanced over at the men who had politely busied themselves with other tasks during their exchange. "Let them talk. This is my land, my life, our life." Tucker's question was tentative, hopeful. "That has a nice sound to it," Daisy admitted, surprised at how easy it was to imagine their futures intertwined. "Marshal and rancher, unusual combination. I like unusual." Tucker squeezed her hand once more before reluctantly stepping back. "Now, about that roof beam." They returned to work, but something fundamental had shifted between them. The careful dance of attraction and hesitation had given way to honest acknowledgement of their feelings. As they worked side by side through the afternoon, Daisy found herself stealing glances at Tucker, marveling at how quickly he had become essential to her world. That evening, after the neighboring ranchers had departed and they had shared a quiet supper, Tucker and Daisy sat on the porch swing in comfortable silence. The stars emerged one by one in the vast Montana sky, and a crescent moon hung low over the eastern hills. "I received a letter from the U.S. Marshal's office in Denver today," Tucker said after a while. "They've officially approved my permanent assignment to Timber Creek. I'll be sworn in formally next week." "That's wonderful news." Daisy leaned slightly against his shoulder, enjoying the solid warmth of him beside her. "The town needs someone like you. There's something else." Tucker reached into his coat and withdrew a small leather pouch. "I've been carrying this around for a week now, waiting for the right moment." Curious, Daisy watched as he opened the pouch and tipped a ring into his palm. The gold band gleamed in the lamplight from the window, a small diamond catching and reflecting the warm glow. "It was my mother's," Tucker explained, his voice soft with memory. "My father gave it to her when they homesteaded in Wyoming, promised her a life they would build together." Daisy's breath caught as she realized what he was offering. "Tucker, I'm not asking for an answer tonight," he hastened to add. "We've known each other only a few months, and I understand if you need more time, but I wanted you to know my intentions." His blue eyes met hers, earnest and clear. "I love you, Daisy Vance. I want to build a life with you, help you make this ranch thrive again, be by your side through whatever comes." Tears pricked at Daisy's eyes, not of sorrow, but of a joy so intense it was almost painful. She had spent so long fighting alone, shouldering burdens meant for two, that the offer of partnership of love overwhelmed her carefully maintained composure. "I don't need more time," she said, her voice steady despite her tears. "I've spent enough time alone, enough time afraid to trust what my heart already knows." Tucker's expression brightened with hope. "And what does your heart know? That I love you too." The words came easily, naturally, as if she had been waiting to say them all along. "That I want that life you're offering, want it more than I've allowed myself to admit." With gentle reverence, Tucker took her left hand and slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit as if made for her, the gold warm against her skin. "Mrs. Thomas Blackwell," he murmured, testing the sound of it. "Has a nice ring to it," Daisy laughed, joy bubbling up inside her. "Marshal and Mrs. Blackwell of Timber Creek, the town gossips will have plenty to talk about. Let them talk." Tucker echoed her earlier words, drawing her close. "This is our life now." As their lips met again beneath the vast Montana sky, Daisy felt the last of her walls crumble. She had been tired of fighting alone for so long, tired of shouldering burdens too heavy for one person, tired of facing each day with only her own strength to rely on. Now, with Tucker's arms around her, with his promise to fight beside her until the end, she could finally allow herself to rest, to hope, to love without fear. The journey ahead would not be without challenges. The ranch would face hard seasons, drought years, market fluctuations. Tucker's badge would bring its own dangers and demands. But whatever came, they would face it together, the marshal and the rancher, partners in all things, bound by love forged in struggle and tempered by shared strength. In the coming months, as word spread of their engagement, the community embraced them with enthusiasm. The wedding, held the following spring in the new church at Timber Creek, drew ranchers and townsfolk from miles around. Martha Simmons, who had once viewed lawmen with suspicion, baked their wedding cake herself, declaring that Tucker Blackwell had proven himself the exception to her rule. The Vance Ranch, now the Blackwell Ranch, began to flourish again under their joint care. With Tucker's steady income as marshal supplementing the ranch's improving finances, they were able to purchase new breeding stock and hire 2 reliable hands. The loan payments were met regularly, and within 3 years, they had reduced the debt by half. Their first child, a son named Joseph after Daisy's father, arrived on a snowy night in their second year of marriage. Tucker paced the porch anxiously until the doctor emerged with news of a healthy boy and mother. When he first held his son, with Daisy watching from the bed, exhausted but radiant, Tucker felt his life had come full circle, the loss of his first family healing through the gift of his second chance. 2 years later, their daughter Sarah, named for Tucker's first wife in a gesture that honored the past while embracing their future, completed their family. The children grew strong in the clean Montana air, learning the ways of the ranch and the meaning of justice from parents who had fought hard for both. As the years passed, Timber Creek grew from a dusty outpost to a thriving town. Tucker's reputation as a fair but uncompromising lawman spread throughout the territory, and he was eventually offered a position as federal marshal for all of Montana. He declined, preferring to remain where his heart had found its home. On summer evenings, long after the children were grown and had families of their own, Tucker and Daisy still sat on their porch swing, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. Their hands, weathered now with age and work, remained intertwined as they surveyed the land they had fought for together. "Any regrets?" Tucker would sometimes ask, though he knew the answer, and Daisy would smile, the years having only deepened her beauty in his eyes. "Not a single one. Every struggle was worth this life we built." In those moments, with the ranch peaceful around them and their love a steady flame that had weathered decades, they remembered the beginning, how a woman tired of fighting alone and a cowboy who rode in to fight beside her had found in each other not just allies, but a love that had sustained them through all the seasons of their lives.